When the message first arrived, most people on Earth did not know how to react. It was not broadcast like an ordinary announcement from a government or a news agency. Instead, it appeared suddenly, across satellites, radios, internet servers, and even on communication systems that had never been connected before. The voice was clear, almost too perfect, as if it came from a place beyond human understanding. The message declared that the Galactic Council, the union of civilizations that had ruled the stars for thousands of years, now claimed authority over Earth. The Council stated that humanity was too young, too inexperienced, and too fragile to manage its own place among the stars. They said Earth would be offered protection, but in return it must obey. The terms were simple but humiliating. Earth was to pay tribute in resources once it expanded into space. Earth's governments were to recognize the Council's authority as the highest law. And most of all, Earth's people were to understand that their world was no longer theirs alone. At first, many people thought it was a trick, maybe some elaborate hoax or a test signal. But when the same message repeated for days without interruption, it became clear. This was no prank. The Council was real, and it had chosen this moment to announce itself. Across the planet, the reactions were mixed. Some were terrified. News channels ran endless debates about whether Earth could resist such power. If civilizations had existed in the stars for thousands of years, what chance did humanity, a species that had only just begun exploring its solar system, truly have? Others reacted with anger. Humanity had fought wars, ended empires, and survived disasters. People argued that no outside power had the right to claim authority over Earth, especially not without even setting foot here. Governments, too, struggled to respond. The larger nations felt the weight of responsibility. Should they accept the Council's authority to protect their people, or should they risk defiance? Smaller nations worried they would have no say at all, that humanity's fate would be decided by a few powerful leaders in secret meetings. In the streets, conversations grew restless. Farmers, workers, teachers, shopkeepers, ordinary people who had little to do with space exploration, suddenly felt their lives caught in something far larger. Some feared invasion, imagining starships descending on Earth's cities. Others wondered if the Council had come as guardians, to prevent humanity from destroying itself. The Council's message repeated itself each night in the skies, written in lights that formed words above the horizon. It was not a threat of war, at least not yet. It was a statement. The galaxy had rules, and Earth was expected to follow them. But humanity has never been a species that bows easily. People remembered history. They remembered how empires had risen and fallen, how stronger powers had once claimed dominion over weaker ones, only to be resisted. They remembered how ordinary men and women had stood against impossible odds. That memory, etched into generations, stirred something deep within Earth's people. In homes, on buses, in marketplaces, people whispered questions. Who gave the Council the right to rule? What did they know of Earth's struggles, of its beauty, of its pain? Could humanity truly allow itself to be ruled without even a fight? Still, fear remained. Everyone knew that if the Council had ships that crossed the stars, then its weapons must be beyond imagination. To resist them could mean destruction. And yet to submit could mean the end of freedom before it had truly begun. Among the leaders of Earth, silence lingered. Days passed and no official reply was given. Some argued for caution. Perhaps the Council meant well and humanity would benefit from joining. Others spoke of dignity, saying that even if Earth was weak, it should not kneel. Meetings grew heated with no agreement in sight. Ordinary citizens grew impatient. They watched the skies, waiting for answers. They watched their leaders, hoping someone would speak with courage. Instead, the Council's message continued to echo, reminding them each day that time was running short. It was during this silence that something unexpected began to happen. Across nations, across cultures, ordinary people started to connect. Social networks, news outlets, community halls, and simple conversations in homes became filled with the same question. What does it mean to be human? Some said humanity was too divided, too consumed by conflict to stand together. But others argued the opposite, that this was the very moment humanity needed unity. For the first time, the entire species faced a common challenge, one that did not care about borders, religions, or languages. The Council's declaration had shaken Earth, but it had also lit a fire. People realized that the real question was not whether Earth was strong enough to resist. The question was whether Earth could find the courage to decide its own fate. In the weeks after the first message, a strange calm spread. Fear had not vanished, but it had been joined by determination. Artists began painting murals of Earth standing against the stars. Writers and musicians created works about freedom, resilience, and defiance. In schools, teachers reminded children that humanity's story had always been about survival against the odds. The council had expected obedience. Instead, it had awakened something else, the quiet, unyielding spirit of a species that had always fought to stand on its own. And while leaders still argued behind closed doors, ordinary people began to share a simple thought. The stars may belong to many, but Earth belongs to us. That thought, repeated in millions of voices, began to take shape. Humanity was afraid, yes, but humanity was also proud. The Council's declaration was only the beginning. For Earth, the real story was just about to unfold. The days following the Council's declaration were heavy with silence, but beneath that silence, something powerful was stirring. Across cities, villages, islands, and deserts, people carried on with their daily lives, but the thought never left their minds. Was humanity now a subject of some distant rulers? The uneasiness was everywhere. Shopkeepers sold food, but glanced at the sky when they thought no one noticed. Workers returned from factories and offices, their conversations drifting to the same topic. Students whispered about the council during lessons, their imaginations filled with starships and alien leaders. Even in quiet homes where families gathered for meals, the question hung in the air, what will Earth do now? Yet hidden within that unease, something else was growing. Humanity had faced fear before. History was full of moments where the world seemed to be ending. Wars, plagues, disasters, but people had survived. They had learned to stand again and again when everything seemed lost. Leaders across the globe knew this well. They sat in long meetings, their faces tense, voices echoing across conference halls. Some argued that Earth must comply for survival's sake. We are too small, they warned, too fragile. If we resist, we will be crushed, but others leaned forward with fire in their eyes. They pointed to humanity's history, the times when stronger empires had tried to rule the weak, when ordinary people had risen to say no. They spoke of revolutions, independence movements, and sacrifices that had built nations. They argued that no species should enter the stars in chains. Still, no decision came. The debates dragged on, while the Council's message continued to hang above Earth like a shadow. But while leaders hesitated, ordinary people began to change. Slowly, fear turned into restless energy. On crowded trains and in rural marketplaces, conversations shifted from fear to resolve. If we give up now, one farmer said to another, what will be left of us? Our children will grow up never knowing freedom. In schools, teachers began to tell students stories, not of fear, but of resilience. They spoke of explorers who had crossed oceans without knowing what lay ahead, of communities that had rebuilt after disaster, of men and women who had stood against impossible odds. The children listened wide-eyed, realizing that the Council's declaration was just another chapter in a much older story. Even scientists and thinkers, who usually worked quietly in their labs and universities, began to speak out. They reminded the public that humanity's strength was not only in weapons or armies, but in its ability to adapt. Earth was a harsh planet filled with storms, diseases, earthquakes, and extremes. Humanity had survived them all. We were born on a world that demands strength, one scientist said during a broadcast. Why should we believe we are weaker than those who come from distant stars? The message resonated. People began to share it, repeat it, and believe it. This spirit showed itself in countless small ways. In a fishing town by the sea, the fishermen painted their boats with Earth's colors and symbols, declaring that the oceans belonged to no one but themselves. In a mountain village, elders gathered children and told them ancient stories of resilience, tales of heroes who had fought not with weapons, but with courage. In sprawling cities, young people created songs, dances, and art that captured a single idea. Earth would not kneel. Yet not everyone agreed. There were still voices of doubt. We are fools if we resist, some said. They have ships that travel the stars. We cannot even leave our own planet without struggling. What chance do we have? These voices were not silenced, but they grew fewer. For every person who gave in to fear, there were 3 who spoke of hope. For every voice that said we cannot, there was another that said we must. The change was not sudden but steady. Humanity had not yet given its reply to the Council, but already in spirit the reply was forming. It was not born from weapons or from leaders in closed rooms, but from the hearts of millions of ordinary people who had lived their entire lives struggling, fighting, and enduring. Across borders and languages, a strange unity began to take shape. Nations that had once distrusted each other now found themselves talking, quietly, about the same future. Rivalries and conflicts did not disappear, but for the first time in living memory, people began to see themselves not only as citizens of their own country, but as part of something larger, Earth itself. And in that unity, a new kind of confidence appeared. Families gathered in front of televisions and screens, watching as small groups of leaders cautiously addressed the world. These leaders did not yet announce defiance, but they spoke with careful strength. They reminded people that fear was natural, but dignity was necessary. They reminded them that even if Earth was small, it had a voice. The speeches were brief, yet they ignited something deeper. The people listening at home did not hear hesitation. They heard the first sparks of resistance. They began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, Earth could stand after all. In one crowded square, a group of young people raised a handmade banner. It read, "The stars may rule themselves, but Earth rules itself." Photos of the banner spread quickly across the world. Soon, similar banners appeared in other cities, painted on walls, carried on marches, displayed in schools. The message was clear. Humanity might be young, but it would not kneel. The Galactic Council, far away in their chambers, could not see the fire that was spreading across Earth. They saw only silence, mistaking it for submission. They had no idea that in homes and hearts, resistance was already alive. As the days passed, the Council's message began to lose its edge. People no longer trembled at its words. Instead, they listened with narrowed eyes, their fear replaced by something harder, sharper, resolve. Earth had not yet spoken, but its spirit had begun to rise. In that unsettled spirit lay the seed of something powerful. Humanity was restless, uncertain, even afraid, but it was also waking up to its true strength. For the first time, people understood that the Council's claim was not just a challenge of power, but a question of identity. And to that question, Earth was slowly preparing its answer. The Council's message had echoed for weeks, steady and unchanging, as if carved into the very air. Every night the same words lit the skies, every broadcast repeated the same authority. But now the moment had arrived. Earth could no longer remain silent. In a grand hall beneath bright lights and cameras, leaders from across the world gathered. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with expectation. No one could pretend anymore that Earth was untouched. The Council had demanded submission, and humanity had to decide whether to bow or to stand. People watched from their homes, schools, and workplaces. In villages where televisions were rare, crowds gathered around a single screen. In cities, thousands sat in squares staring at giant displays. Across every time zone, billions held their breath, waiting to hear Earth's voice. The hall grew quiet as a representative stood. His clothes were simple, his posture steady, but his words carried the weight of an entire planet. He began not with anger, but with respect. He acknowledged the Council's age, its wisdom, its power. He spoke of Earth as a young world, still learning, still reaching for the stars. His tone was calm, but beneath it was steel. Then he said the words that would shake the galaxy. Earth does not kneel. The hall erupted in murmurs, the air electric with tension. The representative raised his hand for silence and continued. He explained that humanity was willing to engage with the Council, to share knowledge, trade, and peace. But Earth would not surrender its right to govern itself. No tribute, no chains, no authority above its own. His words were broadcast live, translated into every language, carried into every home. The effect was immediate. Across the planet, people stood taller. Fear that had weighed heavily on their hearts lifted, replaced by pride. Ordinary workers cheered in crowded markets. Children clapped in classrooms. Families wept with relief as they realized their world had chosen dignity over submission. But far above Earth, in the distant chambers of the Galactic Council, the reaction was far different. The envoys who had delivered the first declaration sat in silence, their faces unreadable. No young world had ever refused before. In the Council's long history, planets had either obeyed or been forced to obey. For Earth to send such a reply was unthinkable. Some members of the council scoffed, dismissing humanity as reckless. They do not understand, one said. They are children playing with fire. Their defiance will not last. Others, however, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew that defiance had a strange power. If Earth resisted openly, others might follow. Planets long under council rule might remember their own lost voices. The chamber filled with debate. Should they crush Earth immediately to make an example? Or should they wait, watch, and measure this new world more carefully? The argument raged, but no decision came. On Earth, the reply transformed daily life. People who had once whispered in fear now spoke openly, their voices firm. Conversations in homes turned from "what if they destroy us?" to "what if we inspire others?" The simple act of saying no had changed everything. In one marketplace, a vendor stood proudly beneath a sign that read, "We answer to no one but Earth." Customers stopped, read it, and smiled. In a quiet village, an elder gathered children beneath a tree and told them, "This is the moment you will tell your grandchildren about. This is the day we chose freedom." Even soldiers and scientists who had been working in silence felt a new sense of purpose. Defense systems were checked again, space programs pushed forward, research accelerated. No one knew whether the council would respond with words or weapons. But Earth was no longer preparing out of fear. It was preparing out of pride. The council's envoys, unsettled by Earth's reply, sent a message back. It was sharp, full of warning, reminding humanity of the consequences of rebellion. The words hinted at punishment, at destruction, at the council's unmatched power. But when that message reached Earth, people no longer trembled. They listened, yes, but they also smiled. For the first time, the council's threat sounded less like law and more like desperation. One journalist wrote in a widely shared article, "They expected us to bow. Instead, we stood. That alone has already changed the galaxy." Indeed, whispers began to travel through space. Other civilizations, small and quiet, heard of Earth's reply. On distant worlds, under alien skies, people who had long accepted the council's rule began to wonder, if a young, fragile planet could stand, why couldn't they? The council did not realize it yet, but Earth's defiance was not contained. It was spreading, like a spark catching dry grass. Meanwhile, back on Earth, life continued, but it carried a new rhythm. Farmers tilled their soil with fresh determination, knowing the food they grew was for free people. Students studied not just for themselves, but for a world that had chosen dignity. Artists painted murals of Earth standing firm against the stars. Every corner of life became touched by the spirit of defiance. The representative who had spoken the words, "Earth does not kneel," became a symbol, not as a hero above others, but as a voice for all. People said he had only spoken aloud what millions already felt in their hearts. Still, uncertainty remained. No one knew what the council's next move would be. Would warships descend from the skies? Would Earth be punished with technology it could not match? The fear had not vanished, but it was different now. It was not the fear of helpless victims. It was the fear of free people who knew the cost of standing their ground, and that fear carried strength. One evening, as families looked up at the night sky, the council's message appeared again. This time it was not a calm declaration, but a demand for compliance. Yet instead of dread, laughter broke out in some homes. Parents explained to their children, "They speak loudly because they are afraid we no longer listen." The council, in its arrogance, had thought Earth's first reply would be weak, hesitant, apologetic. Instead, it had been firm, simple, and clear. And that reply, though only words, had already shaken the foundations of galactic order. For the first time, Earth was not just a small world spinning in the corner of space. It was a voice loud enough to be heard across the stars. And that voice had said no, the galaxy would never forget it. The council had expected Earth's defiance to be loud but brief, like a candle burning too brightly before dying out. They believed the reply, "Earth does not kneel," was nothing more than the pride of a young species that would soon be crushed by fear. But what the council did not understand was that humanity's strength had never come from size, numbers, or weapons. It came from something much harder to measure, something born of struggle, survival, and stubbornness. In the weeks after Earth's first reply, a transformation swept across the planet. At first glance, nothing looked extraordinary. Cities still bustled with traffic. Farmers still worked their fields. Children still ran through schoolyards. But beneath the surface, something new was alive. Humanity was preparing, not just with technology, but with spirit. Scientists who had once worked quietly in their laboratories now felt urgency like never before. They pushed forward projects that had been delayed for years. Space engineers tested rockets, improved engines, and strengthened satellites. Laboratories that studied energy, medicine, and communication opened their doors to share discoveries across borders. No longer were they working only for their own nations. They were working for Earth itself. And yet the most surprising strength did not come from advanced labs. It came from ordinary people. Farmers who had struggled with poor soil for generations shared new methods of farming. Villagers living in remote areas taught others how to survive with little water. Engineers from small towns designed machines with fewer resources but greater efficiency. Humanity realized that its true inventions had always been born from necessity, from the need to endure on a world that was both beautiful and dangerous. Earth itself was a teacher of resilience. Unlike many other worlds, it was not gentle. Humanity had grown strong beneath burning deserts, icy winters, violent storms, and roaring seas. They had survived earthquakes that split cities, floods that swallowed villages, and diseases that once wiped out millions. Each disaster had left scars, but also lessons. The Council may have had greater weapons, but Earth's people carried generations of knowledge on how to face the impossible. This strength began to show in unity. For centuries, humanity had fought over borders, languages, and beliefs. But now, facing an authority that threatened everyone equally, people began to see themselves not just as citizens of nations, but as children of Earth. Rival countries shared intelligence. Old enemies sat at the same tables. Leaders who once avoided each other now exchanged plans. It was not perfect, but it was real. The Council's demand had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It had given humanity one identity. The Council, watching from afar, grew uneasy. Their envoys reported back that Earth's people were not collapsing into fear as expected. Instead, they were organizing, strengthening, and, most dangerous of all, believing in themselves. To understand why Earth's reply was so powerful, one must look into its people. Humanity's history was full of struggle. Long before they dreamed of stars, they had faced conquerors, empires, and rulers who believed themselves unstoppable. But again and again, ordinary men and women had risen, fought, and endured. Humanity's story was one of survival against the odds. And now, facing the greatest challenge yet, that history was their greatest weapon. In the streets, murals appeared, paintings of Earth as a blue globe surrounded by stars standing tall against towering figures. Musicians wrote songs of defiance, their voices echoing across rallies and gatherings. Writers crafted stories where humanity did not bend, inspiring even those who had once doubted. Every piece of art, every song, every story carried the same message. We are stronger than we appear. Even children joined in this spirit. In one small town, a group of students built a model of a spaceship using scraps of metal and wood. They painted it with the words, "Future of Earth." Photos of their creation spread across the world, reminding people that the fight was not only for today, but for tomorrow. Meanwhile, Earth's military forces, usually divided by politics, began working together. They shared strategies, technologies, and defense systems. Pilots trained with new intensity. Soldiers drilled not for conquest but for protection. Though they knew their weapons could not yet match the Council's fleets, they carried themselves with quiet determination. For them, resistance was not about winning instantly. It was about proving humanity would never surrender without a fight. The Council noticed. Their spies whispered that Earth was different. Unlike other young civilizations, humanity did not beg for mercy or fall into chaos. Instead, it grew sharper, stronger, more united. This unsettled the Council deeply, for their power depended not only on weapons but on fear. If fear failed, their control would weaken. One counselor warned, "This planet is dangerous not because of what they have, but because of what they believe." He was right. Belief was Earth's hidden strength. Belief that freedom mattered. Belief that survival was possible even against greater odds. Belief that identity was worth protecting. These beliefs spread faster than any fleet, stronger than any weapon, but belief was not all humanity had. Quietly, Scientists made discoveries that surprised even themselves. A new method of energy storage created in a modest lab promised to power machines far longer than before. Engineers developed stronger alloys able to withstand enormous pressure. Medical researchers produced treatments that could heal wounds in days instead of weeks. These were not the weapons of the Council, but they were tools of survival, and survival was victory in itself. As the weeks passed, humanity's confidence grew. People no longer looked to the skies with only fear. They looked with challenge, with the unspoken thought, "We are here and we will not vanish." On distant planets, whispers spread. Civilizations under the Council's control heard of Earth's defiance. At first they laughed. How could such a young world resist? But then they paused. If Earth, fragile and new, dared to stand, what excuse did they have for silence? The seed of rebellion planted by Earth's courage began to sprout elsewhere. And so Earth's hidden strength was revealed, not in mighty weapons or grand armies, but in resilience, unity, belief, and innovation. The Council had misjudged humanity, thinking it weak, but weakness was never Earth's story. One evening, as the Council's message again flashed in the skies, families gathered outside to watch. But this time, instead of silence, they responded. In villages, people shouted. In cities, crowds sang. Across mountains and plains, the same words rose from millions of voices. "We will not kneel." It was not an official reply, not written on paper or broadcast by leaders. It was something greater, the voice of Earth itself, spoken by its people. And for the first time, the Council felt the weight of that voice. The night was quiet when Earth's final statement was sent. The words were simple, without threats, without prideful boasting. Yet they carried the weight of an entire planet. "We will cooperate, but never kneel." It was broadcast to the stars, a message carried on every frequency the Council had used before. There was no trembling in the voice, no hesitation. It was clear, calm, and absolute. For a long moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. In the Council chambers, silence fell heavier than stone. For centuries, no world had dared speak in such a way. Planets bowed, rulers obeyed, and the Council's authority had gone unquestioned. Now, a small blue world on the edge of a spiral galaxy had broken the silence. Some councilors rose to their feet, furious. "This is rebellion," one shouted. They must be crushed before others follow. But others hesitated. They had seen the strength in Earth's eyes, even from afar. They remembered the tone of its first reply, and now this final message. It was not reckless shouting. It was not desperate anger. It was something far more dangerous: conviction. One elder among them leaned back in his seat and whispered, "They believe. That is something we cannot control." And he was right. Across the stars, news of Earth's words spread like wildfire. Worlds that had long lived under the Council's authority heard of it through whispers, hidden signals, and traveling merchants. For some, it was only a story at first, too strange to believe. But as the words repeated, "We will cooperate but never kneel," hearts began to stir. On distant planets, in cities that had never seen Earth, people began to gather in secret. Some painted Earth's words on walls. Others sang them in chants, quiet at first, then louder. For the first time in generations, hope sparked where there had been only silence. Back on Earth, the impact was immediate. People filled streets not with fear but with pride. In villages, bells were rung. In cities, fireworks were lit. Families hugged, tears running down their faces as they realized the choice had been made, not just by leaders, but by all of humanity. This was not victory. The Council's fleet still hovered beyond the stars. Their weapons were still unmatched. Earth remained vulnerable. But it was no longer helpless. It had spoken, and in doing so it had become something greater than anyone had imagined. Ordinary people felt the change most deeply. Farmers plowing their fields did so with straighter backs. Teachers entered classrooms with brighter eyes, telling children, "You will remember this day as long as you live." Workers in factories, doctors in hospitals, artists in studios, all felt a new strength in their hands. The reply was not just a statement, it was a promise to themselves. For the Council, this was the worst outcome they could have imagined. Earth had not attacked, had not threatened, had not declared war. It had simply refused to kneel. And because of that, punishment would look like cruelty, not justice. Crushing Earth would not silence rebellion. It would feed it. In the streets of alien worlds, chants began. If Earth can stand, so can we. The Council's grip, once firm, began to tremble. On Earth, preparations continued. No one knew what the future would bring. Scientists worked day and night to strengthen defenses. Leaders met across borders, forging alliances once thought impossible. Soldiers trained not for conquest but for the defense of their home. But more important than weapons or treaties was the spirit that had awakened. Children drew pictures of Earth standing tall against giant shadows. Families carved Earth's words into wood and stone. Musicians played melodies that carried across cities, their notes echoing the defiance of a planet. For once, humanity looked not inward at its divisions, but outward at its shared destiny. The Council had demanded submission. Instead, it had given Earth something priceless: unity. The shockwave of defiance reached further than anyone could measure. In the great halls of the Council, debates grew longer, angrier, more desperate. Some argued for invasion, others for patience. But no matter their choice, they knew the truth. The order of the galaxy had already shifted, all because Earth had spoken. Back on the blue planet, night fell. Families sat on rooftops and balconies gazing at the stars. They knew those stars were not empty anymore. Behind some of them, fleets might be waiting. Beyond others, civilizations were watching. Yet fear did not dominate the night. Instead, there was wonder. Children asked their parents, "Will they come for us?" And the parents answered, "Perhaps. But if they do, we will still stand." That answer carried through generations. Earth's reply was not just for the Council. It was for itself. It was a reminder that freedom is not given, it is chosen. It was a declaration that even in the face of overwhelming power, dignity could not be taken. The Council had claimed authority. Earth's reply had shaken them, and as the stars looked down on the small blue world, a new truth became clear. Humanity was no longer just a young species learning to walk among the stars. It was a voice that demanded to be heard, a spirit that could not be broken. The galaxy would never be the same again,